Mornings on Lake Pineview always started the same way. The sprinklers clicked awake before sunrise. The neighborhood dogs announced their opinions on everything, and the smell of cut grass hung thick enough to taste. Hank liked that rhythm. It was simple, predictable, the kind of peace a man earned after 30 years of fixing bridges, following orders, and coming home in one piece. He'd sit on his porch with black coffee, watching the mist rise off the lake like it was thinking over the day ahead. The world didn't owe him anything, and for once, he didn't owe it anything back. That little island out in the lake, that was his reward to himself. Technically, it was more of a sandbar that the county forgot to tax properly. But back in the 90s, when he'd bought the lot, the deed included one parcel extending to natural waterline, inclusive of island feature. Most folks would have ignored that clause. Hank built a small dock out there, hauled over a few planks and a folding chair, and turned it into his favorite fishing spot. He called it the Outpost. His wife, Jan, called it the world's smallest man cave. Either way, it was harmless. He didn't bother anyone, and nobody bothered him. His days rolled by easy, coffee, small repair jobs for neighbors, dinner on the porch with January. He fixed whatever needed fixing. Leaky gutters, loose mailbox hinges, even Mrs. Hargrove's old lawn mower that sounded like a jet engine on takeoff. Folks around Lakeview Ridge trusted Hank. If something broke, you called him before you called a contractor. He never charged much, usually just enough to cover parts and a slice of pie if you had one. It was the kind of community where everyone waved at everyone, even if you didn't know their name, until the HOA got involved. The homeowners association had always been there, technically. Most of the time, they just mailed out reminders about trimming hedges or paying dues. Hank had no problem with that. You want a tidy neighborhood? Fine. But things started to shift the year Marlene became HOA president. She was one of those women who wore sunglasses indoors and talked about community aesthetics, like she was managing a country club. Her husband, Doug, used to mow lawns. Now he was director of grounds. They'd added rules nobody remembered voting on, like banning unauthorized exterior lighting or non-conforming mailbox heights. Hank didn't pay much attention. He kept his grass cut and his porch light warm and yellow. He figured that was good enough. Then came the letter. It showed up on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between the electric bill and a coupon for window tinting. The envelope was cream-colored, official-looking, with notice of violation, stamped in red across the front. Jan tossed it onto the kitchen counter like junk mail, but Hank's habit of reading everything once before trashing it got the better of him. He unfolded the letter and frowned. There was a grainy photo attached, his dock, his chair, and the calm water surrounding his island. Beneath it, in bold type, illegal property structure, immediate removal required. He blinked. Read it again. Illegal structure? He muttered. What in the hell? Jan looked up from her crossword. What's illegal this time? Your boat's too happy. It says the dock's unapproved. Says I'm in violation of community regulations for constructing on common waterway property. She squinted. Common waterway? That island's been yours since before we moved here. I know. It's right on the deed. I got the county map somewhere in the basement. Jan smirked. You sure it's not one of your practical jokes? Hank shook his head, still reading. Nope. Signed by Marlene herself. Says if I don't remove it within 14 days, I could face additional fines or legal action. He sat back, folded the paper neatly, and stared out the window toward the glinting water. The lake looked peaceful as ever, a heron waiting near the reeds. There wasn't a single thing out there that screamed crime scene. Guess I'm an outlaw fisherman now, he said finally. Jan laughed. Should I call the Coast Guard? He grinned but felt that small irritation building, the kind that starts between your shoulders and creeps up behind your ears. Not anger exactly, just that quiet disbelief that grown adults could turn a dock into a moral crisis. That evening, Hank walked down to the water to see if maybe, somehow he'd misunderstood. The dock sat just fine. The wood was treated solid, clean. The illegal structure looked about as threatening as a picnic table. He skimmed his fingers through the lake water and muttered, Illegal my foot. A day later, another letter arrived. This one came with pictures printed in color and a $500 fine for unapproved construction on HOA property. HOA property, those two words rubbed him wrong. Because he knew, plain as day, the HOA didn't own that water. The county did, and he had the paperwork to prove it. But arguing with bureaucracy never went the way you thought it should. He'd learned that in the Army, dealing with supply officers who needed 3 signatures for a wrench. He figured he'd sleep on it. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe the HOA's map was wrong. But 2 mornings later, he woke up to something that made his coffee go cold halfway down his throat. On the far side of the lake, bright orange signs had popped up overnight. Illegal property. Trespass prohibited. In big block letters nailed right into the public walking path fence line. Someone had even stuck one in the dirt near his dock, flapping in the wind like a plastic insult. He didn't need to guess who'd authorized it. Marlene's sense of self-importance had a particular font, bold, underlined, and slightly crooked. Hank stared at the signs for a long minute. Then he just chuckled, slow and disbelieving. Well, I'll be. Later, while fixing the neighbor's mailbox post, he heard the gossip starting. You see what Hank did? They're saying he built it without a permit. You can't just claim part of the lake, can you? It rolled through the cul-de-sac like a lazy wave. The kind that doesn't hurt, but stings all the same. That evening, Hank brought the letter out to the porch and reread it under the glow of his porch light. Jan sat beside him, folding laundry. You gonna fight it? She asked. He rubbed his chin. Don't see the point yet. Maybe I'll just call and ask where they think the property line is. Or maybe they'll fine you for calling too loudly. He smirked. Wouldn't surprise me. There was a long pause, the kind that comes before a small decision you don't know will turn into a big one. He folded the paper again, set it on the table and said, You know what's funny? All I ever wanted was to fish in peace. Guess that's illegal now. Jan patted his arm. Maybe peace always is. The sun dipped behind the trees, turning the lake copper gold. From across the water, he could see the reflection of those signs glowing orange in the fading light, like warning flares against the calm. He thought of how ridiculous it all was, how quiet life had been before someone decided to measure it with a ruler. The sprinklers clicked on again somewhere nearby. The sound was steady, rhythmic, the heartbeat of suburbia. And for the first time in years, Hank felt the rhythm skip. Something about those letters, those signs didn't sit right. Not because of the money, not because of the pride, but because of the principle. He'd followed rules his whole life. Good ones, dumb ones, and a few that didn't make sense to anyone. But this was nonsense dressed up as order. He leaned back, finished his coffee, and gave a quiet, almost amused sigh. All right then, he said to no one in particular. If they want to play by the rules, let's make sure they know what the rules actually say. And with that, he stood up, gathered the letters into a neat stack, and tucked them under his arm. That letter changed everything. The following Saturday morning, Hank woke to the unmistakable sound of hammering across the water. It wasn't construction. It had that uneven, half-hearted rhythm of someone trying to look official without knowing what they were doing. He stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, and squinted through the early sunlight. Sure enough, 2 men in bright orange safety vests were standing near the edge of his island, trying to drive another illegal property sign into the soft, wet dirt. One of them was holding a clipboard upside down. The other was knee-deep in water, cursing softly as the post wobbled and leaned. Hank didn't yell. He just watched. After a minute, the man in the water lost his balance, splashed, and sent a wave rippling through the reeds. The sign toppled sideways. Hank took a long sip of coffee and murmured, Nature's trying to tell you something, fellas. By noon, word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Mrs. Hargrove mentioned it to Jan while walking her dog. They're saying the HOA's taking action. Apparently, that island of yours violates 3 separate clauses. Jan had laughed out loud. 3? I didn't even know we had 3. The absurdity grew legs. On the Lakeview Ridge Community Facebook page, someone posted a photo of Hank's dock with the caption, Asterisk, sad to see people ignoring HOA rules. It ruins it for everyone. Asterisk below it, comments piled up. Asterisk, looks fine to me. Asterisk asterisk, what's illegal about a chair? Asterisk asterisk. This is what happens when people get bored. Asterisk. The HOA's sense of authority was starting to outgrow its logic. By Monday, Hank found an envelope taped to his mailbox. Another letter, this time marked second notice. It warned of asterisk, escalating fines and potential liens. Asterisk, the amount now read $1,000. At the bottom, in smaller type, it said, asterisk, failure to comply may result in further community action. Asterisk. Hank showed it to Jan at breakfast. You think community action means they're gonna storm the island? He asked, half joking. Jan raised an eyebrow. Knowing Marlene, she'll form a committee and call it Operation Clean Water. He grinned. You think they'll need permits for that? For most folks, a $1,000 fine would have caused panic or rage. Hank, though, felt something else, amusement mostly. He'd dealt with generals who yelled louder and bureaucrats who wrote longer. He knew how to handle both, patience and paperwork. Still, he figured he'd at least hear their reasoning in person. So he showed up to the next HOA meeting. The meeting took place in the community clubhouse, a low-roofed building with folding chairs, fluorescent lights, and a faint smell of burnt coffee. About 30 people were there, fanning themselves with printed agendas. Marlene stood at the front in her usual pastel blazer, clutching a clipboard like it was a holy book. Hank took a seat in the back. He didn't announce himself. He just listened. Next item, Marlene said, adjusting her glasses. Unauthorized structure on Lakeview Common property. Namely, the unapproved dock on the North Island. A few people murmured. One man whispered, "That's Hank's spot, right?" Another nodded. Marlene continued, voice firm. Per Section 8.2 of our community guidelines, all waterfront structures require prior approval by the Architectural Review Committee. Hank raised his hand calmly. Excuse me, Marlene. Can I ask a question? She looked up, surprised. Oh, Mr. Dawson. Yes, of course. Who exactly owns the lake? Well, Lakeview Ridge does. The HOA maintains it as common property. Interesting, Hank said. Because my deed says otherwise. A ripple of quiet amusement spread through the crowd. A few neighbors looked down to hide smiles. Marlene forced a laugh. I'm sure there's been some confusion. The map clearly shows. He cut in gently. I pulled the county survey last week. The HOA boundary ends 10 feet before the waterline. My island's outside it. That silenced her. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. Well, she finally said, regardless of jurisdiction, your structure affects the visual harmony of the lakefront. Visual harmony, Hank repeated, nodding thoughtfully. You mean it doesn't match the algae? A few people snorted. One woman actually clapped a hand over her mouth to stop a laugh. Marlene's smile tightened. Mr. Dawson, this isn't a joke. Neither are the fines you're sending me, he said, his voice still calm. If you think I'm in violation, show me the rule I broke. On paper. She promised to follow up. The meeting moved on, though everyone's attention had drifted. By the end, several neighbors stopped to whisper to Hank, You were right to call her out. That's been bothering people for years. She needed that. Back home, Jan was waiting. How'd it go? About like a middle school debate club, he said. Except less organized. She smiled. You're not mad. Nope, he said. Just curious how far they're willing to paddle out before realizing they can't swim. A week later, another escalation arrived, this time literal. While Hank was out fixing a garage door, the HOA sent someone to take photos of the dock for record keeping. The man parked on Hank's property, walked right through the backyard, and snapped pictures without so much as a knock. When Hank returned and found muddy footprints across his grass, he just shook his head. That night, he posted a sign of his own, hand-painted, nailed to the fence line by the shore. It read, Private property, Trespassers will be photographed and billed for time. It wasn't aggressive, just factual. And oddly enough, the next morning, he spotted a new HOA memo online. Asterisk, residents are reminded to maintain neighborly decorum and avoid confrontational signage. Asterisk. The irony wasn't lost on him. Jan laughed when she read it. They can post 20 signs calling you illegal, but yours is confrontational? That's about the size of it, Hank said. The situation might have stayed at that absurd simmer. Letters, signs, polite standoffs. If it weren't for the community newsletter that arrived the following Friday. On page 2, right under summer lawn tips, was a headline, Unapproved construction spotted on Lakeview Island. In smaller text below, asterisk, residents are reminded that unauthorized personal property may result in HOA action. Help keep our community beautiful. Asterisk. And there it was, a photo of his dock zoomed in and grainy, as if it had been taken from behind a bush. Jan handed him the paper with a slow blink. They really printed it? Oh yeah, Hank said, right between the raffle announcement and the lost cat notice. What are you gonna do? He thought for a moment, then smiled. Same thing I did when the army sent me to fix bridges no one said existed. I'm gonna start reading. The following days, Hank visited the county assessor's office, the zoning department, and even the public records building downtown. He spent hours flipping through old maps and plats. The staff started recognizing him by day 3. You back for the Lakeview file? The clerk asked, already reaching for it. Yep, he said. Figure I'll learn more about that lake than the fish do. By Thursday night, his dining table looked like a war room. Documents, maps, sticky notes, color-coded tabs. Jan watched him work, shaking her head. You planning to annex it back into the Union? Nope, he said. Just planning to make sure the HOA learns a little geography. But even as he built his quiet case, the HOA kept poking. Marlene sent one more email, now CCNG the legal committee. It ended with, asterisk, failure to cooperate will be documented as refusal to comply with community governance. Asterisk. He almost admired her persistence. Almost. That evening, Hank walked down to the water again. The last of the daylight hit those orange illegal property signs, fading and flapping in the wind. He crouched, touched the edge of one, and smiled to himself. They're fighting a war with paper, he muttered. Guess it's time I bring my own ammo. Behind him, the porch light flicked on automatically. The soft hum of the neighborhood filled the air. Sprinklers, crickets, a far-off lawn mower. Everything sounded normal, but something in the tone had shifted. The peace was still there. It just had edges now. He turned back toward the house, letters in hand, a quiet determination settling into his shoulders. I thought that was the end of it, Hank would later say, half laughing when he told the story. I really did, but turns out, I was wrong. By the time the next HOA newsletter hit the mailboxes, Hank had already moved from mild amusement to quiet determination. He wasn't out for revenge. Not yet. He just wanted the nonsense to stop. But the thing about nonsense is, when you ignore it, it doesn't fade away. It doubles down. He started his investigation like a man preparing to fix a leaky roof. One nail at a time. The first stop was his basement. Down there, next to an old tackle box and a fan that hadn't worked since 2010, sat a plastic bin labeled property papers. He pulled it onto the workbench and began sorting through decades of paperwork. Deeds, tax statements, plat maps, every line, every signature. He read like a man studying an enemy's playbook. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. A crisp white deed from 1996, stamped and signed by the county recorder. The description was clear as daylight. Lot 14B, extending to natural waterline, inclusive of island feature. Hank tapped the paper twice with his finger, a slow grin forming. Well, Marlene, he muttered. Looks like you built your empire on sand. He decided to get the official confirmation. The next morning, he drove to the county records office. An aging brick building that smelled faintly of dust and printer ink. The clerk, a gray-haired man named Gary, greeted him with the weary friendliness of someone who'd seen every kind of nonsense twice. "What can I do for you, sir?" "Just want to pull the survey files for Lakeview Ridge," Hank said. Gary raised an eyebrow. "You the guy with the island?" Hank chuckled. "Word travels fast. Fastest thing in this county, right after gossip and potholes," Gary said, pulling open a drawer. "What are you looking for, exactly?" "Boundary lines. I want to see if that HOA's got any claim to the lake." Gary flipped through folders, then handed Hank a large, faded blueprint. "There you go. HOA ends right here." He tapped a red line that stopped well short of the water. "And the island's over here. Technically, you're not just outside their boundary. You're outside their jurisdiction." Hank nodded, satisfied. "Appreciate it. You just saved me a week of headache." "Glad to help," Gary said with a grin. "Give him hell politely, of course." That night, Hank spread the map across the dining table. Jan came in carrying 2 mugs of tea, looked at the array of documents, and sighed. "You're building a case, aren't you?" "Building?" "No," he said. "I'm fortifying." She smiled. "You're enjoying this, admit it." He shrugged, lips twitching. "I won't say I'm not." He wasn't planning anything wild, no fireworks or confrontation. Just precision. Hank believed in the quiet power of paperwork. If the HOA wanted a fight in writing, they'd get it. Properly formatted, notarized, and legally airtight. He drafted his letter that same night, slow and deliberate. To the Lakeview Ridge Homeowners Association. As per county records, Parcel 14B, including the lake island in question, remains private property under my ownership. Effective immediately, public access across my deeded shoreline is suspended pending resolution of ongoing property disputes initiated by your office. Respectfully, Henry Dawson. No threats, no sarcasm, just calm authority, the tone of a man who knows exactly where the lines are drawn, literally and legally. He printed 3 copies, signed them in blue ink, and mailed them certified. He even kept the receipts in a Ziploc bag, because nothing says prepared like waterproof proof. 2 days later, the first ripple hit. Marlene called. Hank let it ring twice before answering. "Mr. Dawson," she began, voice tight but polite. "We received your letter." "Glad to hear it," he said evenly. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. The lake is community property, not according to the county." A pause. "Well, regardless, this restriction you've issued, it's creating quite a stir. The boat launch is on my shoreline," he said. "According to the deed. You can't just block access." "I can when it's my land, ma'am." Another long silence, then the sound of paper rustling on her end. Probably the bylaws she clung to like a life raft. "We'll have to bring this to legal review," she said finally. "Please do," he replied, his voice as steady as the lake on a windless morning. When he hung up, Jan was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling faintly. "Well, she's about to learn what happens when you pick a fight with an engineer who reads small print." The following weekend, the fallout began. The HOA had planned their annual summer splash picnic, a big to-do with kayaks, paddleboards, and a barbecue near the lake ramp. Only this year, when they arrived with coolers and folding tables, they found the ramp blocked by a new wooden gate and a freshly posted sign. "Private property. Access suspended until further notice. Asterisk asterisk." The photo of that sign hit the community Facebook group within an hour. Comments exploded. "Wait, why can't we launch the boats? Didn't they say the lake was public? Maybe they shouldn't have messed with Hank's Island." Finally, someone stood up to that board. By sundown, Hank's phone was buzzing with messages from neighbors he barely knew. One text simply read, asterisk, legend, asterisk. At the next HOA meeting, chaos reigned. Marlene called an emergency session, complete with donuts and visible stress. Hank didn't attend, he didn't need to. The whole thing was recorded and uploaded online by a frustrated member. He watched from home, sipping coffee as the meeting devolved into finger-pointing. Whose bright idea was it to fine him without verifying ownership? Someone asked. "Don't look at me," another replied. "You signed the notice." Marlene tried to calm them. "Let's not assign blame. Too late, someone shouted from the back. You assigned a fine. Hank chuckled, rewinding the video to hear it again. Meanwhile, the lake sat quiet. Without access to the ramp, the HOA couldn't use their boats. The water looked more peaceful than ever. Even the ducks seemed to enjoy the break from paddleboarders. Jan teased him one morning as they sat on the porch. You realize you've grounded an entire neighborhood, right? Temporarily, he said with mock seriousness. Consider it maintenance. Still, Hank wasn't cruel. He didn't gloat, didn't post online. He just went about his routine, mowing, fishing, fixing things, while the neighborhood slowly turned on its self-appointed rulers. Every day, another sign of panic appeared. Emergency emails, urgent newsletters, special committee meetings. The board was crumbling under its own weight, and Hank hadn't raised his voice once. He'd built his revenge the way he built everything. Steady, methodical, and impossible to tear down. But the best part, the cherry on top, came 2 weeks later when the HOA's official statement arrived. It began with bureaucratic stiffness, but quickly melted into embarrassment. Due to recent clarification of property lines, the Lakeview Ridge HOA recognizes that the island located within Lake Pineview does not fall under HOA jurisdiction. We regret any misunderstanding and are working toward amicable resolution. Hank read it twice, then pinned it to the corkboard in his garage next to his fishing license. Jan peeked over his shoulder. You're keeping that as a trophy? Course not, he said deadpan. It's documentation. But in truth, it was better than any trophy. It was proof that calm beats chaos, patience beats pettiness, and sometimes, reading the rules out loud is louder than shouting. As the sun dipped behind the lake that evening, Hank stood at the water's edge, hands in his pockets. The illegal property signs had been taken down. The reflection of his dock shimmered clean and unbothered. They had no idea what was coming next, he murmured, half smiling, half remembering how it all started with a single envelope. The calm before the storm lasted exactly 4 days. On the 5th morning, Hank found a folded letter wedged in his mailbox that looked less like official mail and more like a cry for help. The HOA's return address was scrawled hastily in pen, as if someone didn't want to be associated with it. Inside, in that unmistakable corporate tone that tries to sound polite while shaking a finger, Marlene wrote, Asterisk, your recent decision to restrict access has caused significant disruption. The board urges you to reconsider for the good of the community. Asterisk. Hank smiled. That phrase, for the good of the community, was HOA code 4 asterisk, we messed up, and now we need your help. Asterisk. He tucked the letter in his back pocket and went about his morning. By noon, the HOA meltdown was in full swing. Someone had posted a video on Facebook showing the empty lake ramp, with the caption, Asterisk, can't even launch my kayak because of this ridiculous property dispute. Asterisk. The comments section looked like a small-town courtroom. Half the neighbors defending Hank, half calling for cooperation. One guy wrote, Asterisk, pretty sure he's the only one who actually read the bylaws. Asterisk. Another replied, Asterisk, maybe the HOA should try it sometime. Asterisk. The HOA board tried to control the narrative. They sent out a newsletter titled Community Waters Update, a 3-paragraph masterpiece of bureaucratic spin. It claimed the board was working diligently to resolve a misunderstanding regarding shared lake access, and asked residents to remain patient as legal clarifications are underway. Jan read it over breakfast and laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. They make it sound like you started a war. Well, Hank said, buttering his toast, they fired the first shot. I just read the rulebook out loud. That weekend, the board held an emergency meeting at the clubhouse, the second one in a week. Hank didn't attend, but his neighbor Phil did. Phil called later, voice still shaking from laughter. Buddy, you missed a show. Marlene brought a stack of printouts, like she was testifying in front of Congress. Half the board walked out before the donuts were gone. What set em off? Hank asked. She started reading this long statement about protecting community image, and someone in the back yelled, Protect it from what, ducks? Hank chuckled. Good to know democracy's alive and well. The chaos didn't stop there. Without access to the lake, the HOA's summer calendar crumbled. The fishing derby got canceled, the paddle and picnic rescheduled indefinitely, and the neighborhood kids started calling the ramp Marlene's Wall. It became a running joke. Even the UPS guy used it once, chuckling as he dropped off a package. "Gotta deliver by the wall, huh?" Behind the laughter, though, the board was spiraling. Someone leaked their group email chain, a flurry of passive-aggressive exchanges filled with phrases like, "We can't let one homeowner dictate terms," and asterisk, "Does anyone actually have the original lake plat on file?" Asterisk, one member even wrote, asterisk, "We might have overstepped a bit." Asterisk, Hank didn't need to lift a finger. They were undoing themselves. Still, the situation reached new comedic heights when the HOA tried to file an injunction for community access. They sent the paperwork to the county, who promptly bounced it back with a note. Asterisk, no jurisdiction over private property. Asterisk, it was over in less than 24 hours. The next morning, a news van appeared at the edge of the neighborhood. Hank was on his porch when the reporter approached. "Mr. Dawson, we're with Channel 7. Mind telling us about the lake dispute?" He smiled politely. "Not much to tell. HOA said my island was illegal. County said it wasn't. I closed access until they could figure it out." The reporter blinked, clearly disappointed that the story lacked fireworks. "So no confrontation? No yelling? Nope. Just letters." By the evening, the segment aired anyway. Asterisk, local veteran blocks HOA access in property rights dispute. Asterisk, it was surprisingly sympathetic. They even interviewed a neighbor who said, "Hank's the most reasonable guy you'll ever meet. If he's mad, it's because someone earned it." The clip spread online, and by the next day, the HOA inbox was overflowing. People from other neighborhoods sent supportive messages, some even asking, asterisk, "Can you teach our HOA a lesson too?" Asterisk. Inside the boardroom, though, panic reigned. Marlene called another special session. Hank heard about it from Phil, who attended just for the entertainment value. "You ever seen a woman rage whisper?" She was whispering and yelling at the same time. "Said you made the community a laughingstock on local TV." "Well," Hank said dryly, "truth has good ratings." Then came the confrontation. It was a humid afternoon when a knock sounded on Hank's door. When he opened it, 3 HOA board members stood on his porch. Marlene in front, clipboard clutched like a shield. Behind her were 2 nervous-looking men, one holding a manila folder. "Hank," she began, forcing a smile, "we need to talk about the lake situation." "Of course," he said, stepping aside. "You folks want lemonade?" They declined. "Figures." She launched right in. "This blockade is escalating tensions. Residents are upset, and as HOA president, I'm asking you to reopen access while we—" He held up a finger. "Not a blockade. It's called private property." "Semantics," she snapped. "You're part of this community, and your actions affect everyone." He tilted his head. "So did your signs." Her nostrils flared. "We were simply enforcing policy." "Which policy?" he asked, calm as a lake in winter. "Because according to the bylaws, you can't enforce regulations beyond HOA property lines." The man with the folder cleared his throat. "We have an updated map." Hank took it, scanned it, and smiled. "This map's from 2004. You're missing the revision after the annex change." They looked confused. He walked to his desk, pulled out the certified survey from the county, and laid it beside their printout. The difference was unmistakable. Their map ended 10 feet short of the lake. "See that line?" he said, tapping the page. "That's your jurisdiction. Everything beyond it, mine." Marlene's face turned a shade of pink that didn't exist in nature. "You can't expect us to just—" "I don't expect anything," he said, "but I do require you to stop trespassing. Which brings me to this." He handed her a neatly folded document, a letter from his lawyer. "Cease and desist. Any further attempt by the Lakeview Ridge HOA to access, claim, or alter the aforementioned property shall constitute trespass under county statute." The silence that followed was so heavy even the porch wind chimes hesitated. Finally, Marlene spoke through clenched teeth. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," Hank said with a small smile. "But I'll regret it from my dock." They left without another word. One of the men muttered "good luck" under his breath as they walked away. That night, Hank sat on his porch, the lake glowing silver under the moon. Jan joined him with 2 glasses of iced tea. "You finally dropped the hammer?" she asked. "Paper hammer," he said. "My favorite kind." She laughed softly. "You know this'll be neighborhood legend by morning, right?" "I'm counting on it." And sure enough, by sunrise, the community Facebook page was ablaze again. Photos of the HOA trio leaving his house made the rounds with captions like, "Mission failed," and asterisk, "The Great Lake Liberation of Pineview." Asterisk, someone even made a meme of Marlene holding her clipboard with the words, "Jurisdiction denied." By afternoon, the board announced another emergency vote, this time to decide whether to pursue legal action or seek alternative resolution. It wasn't even close. The majority voted to stand down. But before Marlene resigned herself to defeat, she tried one last move. An official letter, this time from an HOA lawyer. It was worded carefully, full of legalese and veiled threats. Hank read the first paragraph, smiled, and handed it to his attorney. The next day, his lawyer replied with 3 pages of legal citations that ended, politely but firmly, with asterisk, "Please refrain from further harassment of our client." Asterisk. It was over. But before the dust settled, Hank took one quiet moment to address his invisible audience, the thousands of unseen viewers listening to stories like his. "At this point," he said, voice steady, "I've got to ask, have you ever dealt with an HOA like this? Drop your story in the comments, hit subscribe if you love poetic justice, and let's see how many of us have survived HOA brutality." He smiled faintly, eyes still on the calm water. Then, as if the universe wanted perfect timing, another envelope appeared in his mailbox the next day. The return address read, "Lakeview Ridge HOA, final notice." He opened it, half expecting another threat. But what he found made him laugh out loud. Inside, in short, embarrassed language, asterisk, "We regret the misunderstanding and will be removing all signage immediately." Asterisk. He leaned back, took a slow breath, and said to himself, "Now that's what I call community progress." The lake shimmered, peaceful again, and somewhere across the water, the sound of a hammer echoed. Probably someone taking down the last illegal property sign for good. The next morning, the lake looked different. Not physically, but in that subtle, emotional way a place changes once peace has been earned. The water was still as glass, the kind of stillness you only get after a storm. The illegal property signs were gone. The shoreline looked clean again, and for the first time in months, Hank felt like he could breathe without irritation humming in the back of his head. He stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the mist roll off the water. Jan joined him, wrapping a light sweater around her shoulders. "Looks like the circus finally packed up," she said. "Yeah," Hank said. "Guess the ringleader's out of business." That was only half a joke. 2 days earlier, the HOA had sent its final official letter, part apology, part surrender. It was short, written by someone clearly swallowing pride one word at a time. "Dear Mr. Dawson, upon further review of property boundaries and relevant records, the HOA acknowledges that your island and dock are private property and not subject to association oversight. We regret any confusion caused by previous correspondence and signage. Respectfully, Lakeview Ridge Homeowners Association." Jan had read it out loud with a grin so wide it could have lit the porch. "Did you ever think you'd see the day?" "Oh, I figured it'd come eventually," Hank said. "Bullies fold fast when they run out of paper." She laughed. "That's going on your tombstone." He didn't gloat. Not in front of people, anyway. He wasn't the type to spike the ball after the touchdown. But there was quiet satisfaction in knowing he'd beaten them at their own game, using nothing more than patience and a printer. The following weekend, Hank reopened the boat ramp, on his terms. He built a new sign by hand, carving the letters into varnished wood, and mounting it with stainless steel bolts. It read, "Private access, by courtesy of the owner." A message with just the right amount of irony. Neighbors started dropping by again. Some came to thank him, others just to satisfy their curiosity. Phil, the loudest of the bunch, showed up with a six-pack and a grin. "You realize you're a local legend now, right?" he said, handing Hank a cold beer. "Half the neighborhood's calling you the Lake Sheriff." Hank chuckled. "I prefer retired engineer with free weekends." "Man, you're too modest. You took on the HOA and won. That's like catching lightning in a bottle." "More like filing it in triplicate," Hank said. Word spread fast. At the next neighborhood meeting, turnout tripled. People who'd never said a word before suddenly wanted to talk about reforming the board. Marlene wasn't there. She'd quietly stepped down, citing personal reasons. Her vice president, a meek guy named Dennis, stood in front of the group with a forced smile. "We'll be working on restoring trust in the community," he said, avoiding Hank's eyes. Phil whispered, translation, "They're scared to find anyone ever again." After the meeting, Hank lingered outside, watching the crowd. For the first time, people weren't whispering about him. They were laughing, talking openly, even making jokes about illegal islands and boundary blessings. The fear that used to hang over every interaction had evaporated. Jan nudged him. "Feels different, doesn't it?" "Yeah," he said quietly, like somebody finally opened a window. In the days that followed, small gestures started appearing. Thank you notes, a pie left on the porch, a hand-drawn card from a kid that said, "Asterisk, thanks for saving the lake." Asterisk. Hank kept everyone. He wasn't sentimental about much, but these meant something. It wasn't about revenge or pride, it was about fairness. The kind of fairness people stopped believing in after dealing with too many petty tyrants in polo shirts. And yet, for all the praise, Hank stayed the same. He still mowed his lawn on Tuesdays, fixed mailboxes for free, and fished off the dock every morning with a thermos beside him. The only difference was the look he got from passing neighbors. Respectful nods, half smiles, even the occasional salute from across the water. One afternoon, as he sat on the dock cleaning his fishing reel, he heard footsteps crunch behind him. He turned to see Marlene, dressed not in her usual blazer, but jeans and a sweatshirt, sunglasses perched in her hair. She looked a human, tired. "Hank," she said softly, "can we talk?" He didn't answer right away, just gestured to the extra chair. "Sure. Have a seat." She hesitated before sitting. The lake lapped gently against the dock's edge. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally. "Things got out of hand. I let the rules become more important than the people." Hank looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Takes guts to say that." "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just didn't want to leave things like that." He smiled faintly. "Well, for what it's worth, I never took it personal. Everyone gets carried away when they think they're in charge of something." That surprised her. "You're not angry?" "Anger's like fertilizer," he said. "Feed it too long. Everything smells bad." She laughed despite herself. "You always talk like that?" "Only when I win." For a second, the two of them just sat there, watching the water. Marlene glanced at the new sign and chuckled. "That's clever. Thought you'd appreciate the wording," he said. "I do. It's very you, polite, but with teeth." When she left, she extended a hand. "For what it's worth, you were right. The rules only work when they protect people, not punish them." He shook her hand. "You'll figure it out." After she walked away, Hank sat in the fading light for a long time, watching the ripples fade where her reflection had been. The lake was calm again. Clean, quiet, whole. It wasn't victory that filled him, but something gentler. Closure, maybe. That evening, he grilled burgers on the porch while Jan read the newspaper beside him. "You realize you've changed the whole tone of this neighborhood," she said. He flipped a burger. "Didn't mean to. That's the best kind of change. The kind that happens by accident." She smiled. "And now that you're famous, what's next?" "Thinking about charging dock admission," he deadpanned. She swatted his arm. Be serious. I am, he said, grinning. $5 a kayak. They ate under the porch light, the hum of crickets filling the air. Every now and then, the sound of laughter drifted from across the lake. The HOA might still exist on paper, but its power had vanished into the night air. A few weeks later, a small envelope arrived in the mail. No fines, no threats, just a note from Dennis, the new acting president. Mr. Dawson, thank you for your patience and your example. You reminded us that community isn't about control. It's about respect. I hope you'll consider joining the board to help us rebuild. Hank read it twice, smiled, and tossed it in the junk drawer. Once was enough, he said to Jan. He didn't need a seat at their table. He'd already proven what he came to prove. That common sense still stood a fighting chance. That night, he took his old folding chair out to the dock, the same one that had started it all. He sat down, lying in the water, the air cool against his skin. The moon reflected perfectly in the ripples, broken only when a fish surfaced. He reeled in slowly, quietly thinking to himself. It wasn't about the island, he murmured. It was about the principle. Jan's voice drifted from the porch. Catch anything? He smiled. Patience. Good bait, she said, laughing. He leaned back, satisfied. The dock creaked softly beneath him. The sound of calm earned honestly. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't rebellion. It was simply balance restored. The next morning, as sunlight hit the new wooden sign, the words glowed golden. Private access, by courtesy of the owner. Neighbors stopped to read it, some nodding, some chuckling. A few even said they liked it better than the old metal HOA signs. One man said, "That should be our new motto." Hank smiled. It already is. And with that, he turned back toward his house, coffee steaming in his hand, the quiet satisfaction of justice lingering in the air like the smell of fresh-cut grass. Sometimes victory doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like a calm lake, a mended fence, and the knowledge that, this time, common sense won. The summer drifted on, slow and peaceful, the way small-town summers should. The drama that had once made Lake Pineview feel like a courtroom had melted away into warm evenings, and the smell of barbecue smoke drifting lazily across the water. Life, at last, had gone back to normal, or at least Hank's version of normal, quiet, steady, earned. Most mornings started the same. Coffee on the porch, birdsong in the distance, a ripple of water against the dock. The private access, by courtesy of the owner's sign, stood polished and proud, the wood darkening in the sun like a badge of good sense. Every time Hank looked at it, it gave him that small, private grin that only comes from knowing you were right, and you proved it without yelling once. Jan would tease him sometimes. You gonna salute that sign every morning? He'd shrug. Man's gotta respect the flag of his own republic. By now, even the HOA had softened around the edges. The new board, mostly younger couples and a few older folks who'd had enough of all that nonsense, had stopped sending fines altogether. They still held meetings, but they felt more like potlucks than tribunals. Dennis, the reluctant president who'd inherited the mess, even dropped by one afternoon with a pie from his wife. Just a peace offering, he said awkwardly. Hank took it with a nod. Well, as long as it doesn't come with a lien. Dennis laughed nervously. Not this time. After he left, Jan tasted the pie and smiled. You realize you're the only person they've ever apologized to with dessert? Guess I'll have to get in trouble more often, Hank said. The lake itself seemed to sense the truce. Kids were back to skipping stones, couples were kayaking again, and even Marlene, yes, even her, would occasionally pass by on her pontoon, offering a curt nod instead of a scowl. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't war, and that was progress. One evening, as the sun turned the water orange and pink, Hank and Jan sat on the dock, the boards warm beneath their feet. The air smelled of cedar and cut grass, with a faint whiff of someone grilling a few lots over. You know, Jan said, I think they actually learned something. Maybe, Hank said, or maybe they're just too embarrassed to try again. Either way, peace is peace. He nodded, watching the reflection of the clouds ripple across the lake. You ever notice how the water only looks calm once you stop stirring it? That's deep, she said. You rehearsed that? He smiled. Nope. Just been waiting for a chance to sound wise. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. A heron flew low over the water, graceful and slow, its wings casting long shadows. The only sounds were the soft lapping of the lake and the steady hum of cicadas. Then, almost out of nowhere, Jan started laughing. What? Hank asked. I just remembered when they called your island illegal property. The words still make me laugh. Like you'd built a casino out there. Hank chuckled. Yeah, that was my favorite. Still can't believe they printed it in the newsletter. Unapproved structure on Lakeview Island. You framed that one too, didn't you? He smirked. Top drawer in the garage. Right next to the apology letter. You're impossible. Efficient, he corrected. Impossible's what they called me before I sent the cease and desist. As twilight deepened, the neighborhood lights began to flicker on. Soft yellows, a few whites, nothing garish. The whole place looked like a Norman Rockwell painting that had been put through a bureaucratic blender and somehow survived. Hank felt a strange fondness for it all. The ridiculousness, the pettiness, even the lessons that came wrapped in frustration. It was a reminder that no matter how small the stage, human nature was always running the same play. Control, resistance, understanding. Some folks needed a fine print to learn it. A few days later, he was fixing the community mailbox. Yes, their mailbox, the same HOA one that had once delivered his fines. When an older neighbor named Ruth stopped by. She'd lived in the subdivision since the first foundation was poured, and her husband had been on the original board. You did good, Hank, she said, watching him tighten a loose screw. Just keeping the mail from falling out, he said. No, she said, shaking her head. I mean, with all that lake business. You reminded people that rules aren't supposed to replace reason. Hank smiled softly. I just wanted my fishing spot back. She winked. That's what starts most revolutions. After she walked off, Hank leaned against the mailbox and thought about it. Maybe she was right. Not about the revolution part, he wasn't about to start one, but about the reminder. He hadn't set out to teach anyone anything, but somehow he had. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth something. Later that evening, he sat down with his old notebook, the one he used for projects, and wrote a few words on a clean page. Common sense isn't common. It's practiced. He didn't know why he wrote it. Maybe for himself. Maybe for whoever bought the place after him someday. Maybe just to see it written down, proof that lessons could come from nonsense if you were patient enough. The months slipped by. Fall came to Lake Pineview in soft brushstrokes. Orange leaves, cooler mornings, a sharper smell in the air. The HOA sent out their annual calendar again, this time including a new event, Community Appreciation Picnic. At the bottom, in small print, it read, Location. Courtesy of Mr. Henry Dawson's Lakeside Access. When Hank read it, he just shook his head. They finally got the word courtesy right. At the picnic, kids splashed in the shallows while adults mingled near the grill. Someone even made a wooden plaque that read * Lakeview Ridge, where neighbors make waves, not wars. Hank didn't know who came up with it, but he had to admit it wasn't half bad. Marlene was there too, quieter, humbler. She approached him near the end, paper plate in hand. The lake looks good, she said. Thanks, he replied. Been trying to keep it legal. She laughed, and for once it sounded genuine. You'll never let me live that down, will you? Not unless you outfish me someday, he said. Then I guess I'm doomed. After she walked away, Jan came up behind him and whispered, You two almost sound like friends. Don't push your luck, he said. The sky turned gold, then lavender, then that soft blue that means another day's done. The lake mirrored every color back perfectly. Hank thought about how much noise one little argument had caused, and how much quiet it had restored when it finally ended. Later that night, sitting on the dock with Jan, he said, You know, I don't regret any of it. Not even the signs? The fines? The gossip? Especially not those, he said. Without all that, I wouldn't have remembered how good it feels to stand your ground. She smiled. You think they'll ever fine anyone else? Oh, sure, he said. Give it time. Petty doesn't disappear. It just takes a vacation. They both laughed. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of laughter and clinking glasses from across the lake. The world felt small again, manageable like it used to. Hank leaned back, hands behind his head, eyes on the stars. Funny thing about rules, he said softly. The people who write them always forget they can be read by everyone else. Jan rested her head on his shoulder. You should put that on the next sign. Maybe I will, he said. Right under private access. They sat there for a long time, the night cool and calm, the dock creaking gently beneath them. Somewhere across the water, a frog croaked, and a porch light flickered out. And as the last of the ripples faded, Hank smiled to himself, the words forming quietly in his mind. Words that summed up everything he'd learned through one ridiculous, deeply human chapter of suburban life. So if your HOA ever sends you a letter like mine, he said softly, as if telling a story to no one and everyone at once, remember, you can't control the petty, but you sure can outsmart it. The lake shimmered back at him, peaceful, unbothered, and very much his own.